Relational dialectics theory, this one's maybe a little bit more abstract, but simpler. So I know that seems to kind of contradict each other. But what we're really talking about with relational dialectics is the conflict kind of management, the tensions that we have within relationships that can sometimes lead to conflict. But I still put it in this section on theory because it still really is a relational communication theory. So I'm going to talk about three major dialectical tensions. Again, basically what these are literally tensions within the relationship. So these are the things that, again, can create conflict. And maybe when I get into the examples, this will be a little bit clearer. So the first one might be openness and closeness in a relationship. So there might be that tension of, I'm very open and I want to talk about everything, but my partner might be very closed and doesn't want to talk about anything. Well, that obviously creates conflict. As we'll see when we talk about Gottman's research, there's very much a real phenomenon called the wife demand, husband withdrawal, where when the female says, I need to talk right now, and the male says, whoa, I'm not listening, I'm shutting down. That can obviously lead to conflict. So we can see here where openness, closeness would be one. And this is not necessarily just for close romantic relationships. Where I actually pulled this information is from a paper in family communication. And openness, closeness in that situation makes a lot of sense, because what do you do when everyone in your family wants to sit down and talk about everything, whereas you don't want to say anything about it? And one of the examples that I always like to use here is an example of when you marry into another family and they do things differently than what you do. It's a very hard adjustment. So let me give you an example of that. In my family, we do tend to be very close. We really don't talk about our emotions. We really don't talk about our feelings very much. In fact, it was always one of those things where in my family there was no sympathy. If you complained about something, there was, well, what are you going to do about it? And I tend to be that way also. I tend to not be as empathetic as I probably should be. In my husband's family, they are very open. They will sit around in a circle, talk about feelings, cry for hours on end, what feels like sometimes. For me, someone who is very much, well, what are we going to do about it, instead of crying about it, you can see where that tension comes through. There's the very openness of expression of emotions and talking things through versus the closeness of, let's just cut to the chase and get it over with. Let's just not even talk about it and just make it go away. So because my husband and I both came from these different families, when we talk sometimes, you can see where he wants to sit down and talk about all of our feelings and talk about things, whereas I'm just saying, let's just figure out what we're going to do about it and just be done with it instead of getting the feelings out in the open. Now, I am getting a lot better about that, and I think he's getting a lot better too about not just talking about it and talking about it and talking about it for a long time. So we've created that balance, but that took a long time to do that. So that's an example of one of the dialectical tensions. Autonomy connectedness is another thing, and this is one probably will make more sense to you, in that how do you balance your own personal freedom and also your connectedness with your partner? So do you do everything together as a couple, or do you do your own things too? How do you create that balance? So you can see where that could create conflict in relationships, because you want to do something on your own, but your spouse wants to do something with you. Yeah, there you can see kind of creating that balance is hard, and that takes a lot of time. There's also the novelty predictability kind of thing, and what do you value in your relationship? Do you like to try new things, or do you like to do the same thing over and over again? So and this again it can go with family communication, this can go with anything, but you can see where I want to try somewhere new tonight. Oh, but I really felt like going to the Olive Garden. We eat there every week. Yeah, but I really like it. And that's kind of a petty example, but I think you can think maybe a little bit bigger picture about novelty versus predictability, and how, again, that can create some conflict. Maybe someone just likes, and you get comfortable in the relationship, and somebody wants to try something new, but why would you want to try something new? You're pretty comfortable with things as is. And a lot of this has to do with, again, individual personalities coming together and trying to balance these two tensions. And again, this is just 3 examples. There are actually a lot of different tensions. You could probably come up with some of your own tensions that you've seen in your relationships. This is just kind of a basic overview of what this theory is saying and some examples.